Now, here is a question for you. Do these three signatures, which we're about to show you, look like they have been signed by the same person? Now take a look at another one, this signature. And does this look likely to have been signed by the same person as that one? And another example, what if we told you that a very similar looking signature appeared over a different name? Here are two examples of that. Well, handwriting experts have told us it's highly likely that the same person has been signing in different names and also that different people have been signing over the same name. That is serious because these signatures are on documents used to repossess people's homes, including statements of truth and witness statements submitted to the courts. Some of them are by representatives of a government bank, UK Asset Resolution, and others by representatives of Lloyds Bank. The BBC's economics correspondent Andy Verity has been investigating this and can tell us more. How has this all come about, Andy?
Well, as you can imagine, it's not through official channels, Joanna. This is through ordinary borrowers doing something very unusual, having a really close read of the documents that they get, chasing their debts and looking at the signatures. Now, most of us wouldn't think of that as our favourite pastime, looking at those documents. But some of the people facing repossession became concerned that forgery of signatures, routine forgery of signatures in repossession actions, which happened in millions of cases in the United States, has also been happening here. The banks strongly deny it, as you mentioned before, but in growing numbers, bank customers have been checking back on their documents, and campaigners have now gathered a growing body of evidence of dodgy signatures. Now, the banks in question include, as you mentioned, UK Asset Resolution, the government-owned bank. There's also evidence about Lloyds Banking Group, and I went to Lancashire earlier this week to find out more.
I was just determined that this wasn't going to kill us, so to speak, to finish it off. So I was just thinking about keeping going and keeping going and keeping going.
For Brenda and John Wright, it may have been years ago, but the memories are still raw and painful. In 2013, when Brenda was 71 and John was 74, they were coping with a lower income than they'd been used to, but enjoying retirement, living in a rented flat here in Southport, Lancashire.
Yeah, there was two vans parked there, wasn't there? And one here.
All the bailiffs.
But then, lawyers for the government-owned bank, Mortgage Express, started sending letters. There'd been a dispute between the bank and the flat's owner over some mortgage arrears. They were served notice of repossession. They offered to pay more rent to help clear the arrears, but Mortgage Express wasn't interested.
You could see that there was no way out of this situation, even paying a little bit of higher rent for a short while.
Repossession is meant to be a last resort, but was the government-owned bank observing that?
Never.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
It was the first resort in our instance, yeah.
In February 2014, the bailiffs came to evict them from their flat in this house. They had no home to go to.
I went down with shingles, and I firmly believe that was down to all the stress that we'd suffered.
Did the lawyers for Mortgage Express know that they were kicking two pensioners in their 70s out of a home?
On all the applications, they could see obvious what the dates of birth were, but that's just one of a pile. So it doesn't make any difference.
Mortgage Express was part of Bradford and Bingley in the noughties property boom, when it lent heavily in the buy-to-let market. Along with Northern Rock, Bradford and Bingley was bailed out by taxpayers and nationalised during the 2008 banking crisis. In 2010, its £42 billion of loans were put in a newly formed bad bank called UK Asset Resolution, or UCAR for short, owned by Her Majesty's Treasury. This is the old headquarters of Bradford and Bingley in West Yorkshire. Today, what's left of it wants to be lending as little money to its borrowers as possible. What's unusual about UCAR as a company is that its job is to put itself out of business. Its instructions from the government are to get rid of as many loans as possible, either by selling on the right to collect the repayment money to another company, or by just pulling out of loans, just like the one used to buy John and Brenda's flat. The question is, Have those orders from the government led this taxpayer-owned bank to forget a crucial principle, often repeated by ministers in public, that repossession must only be used as a last resort? John and Brenda saw something odd about the signatures on the documents from legal representatives for Mortgage Express.
It is not right if there is a discrepancy.
It looked like different people were signing over the same name on statements of truth used to evict them.
But once that signature is on there, whoever it is, that's it. Whoever it is. Yeah? Because you've got no power against that signature.
We showed some of the signatures to a top handwriting expert who gives evidence in court cases about alleged forgery. So Adam, these three signatures were all over the same name. How likely are they to be the same person?
I think very unlikely, because they're very different in their structure. You've got this movement, if you look at the pressure in that direction, and it's over to the right. You've got a covering stroke here and coming down quite strongly. Though that thickness of stroke could be, and you can't really tell, that it could be similar to that stroke, this is all putting the letters in the middle. There's no reaching up.
I see, whereas this person is
where
a bit
this
more...
person is lifting. Do you see the difference? Where, I mean, this one is definitely lifting, and this could be actually coming in the opposite direction. So the whole movement and the fluency of the signatures look different.
John and Brenda aren't alone. Julian Watts came across similar dodgy signatures on documents used in repossession actions by Mortgage Express and by Lloyds Bank. A former partner at the business consultants KPMG, he suspected it had become a business process, as it had in the United States, where banks and their professional helpers were taking illegal shortcuts, forging signatures in other people's names to plough through multiple repossession actions.
In the States, how it was all discovered was a customer realised that signatures in the name of a particular person may have been forged and connected with some other people. And that eventually led to the investigation by the Attorney Generals. And when the Attorney Generals investigated it, they found that hundreds of thousands of bank court documents had been forged in the name of the same person. So one person's name had been used on hundreds of thousands of court documents, and they'd all the signatures in that name had been forged.
Julian's made it his mission to expose what he alleges is systematic industrial-scale forgery here in the UK, launching a campaign to gather more evidence, the bank's signature forgery campaign.
Because as a result of the campaign, we've already identified over a dozen names of people in the UK where it appears that multiple people are forging signatures in the name of that person. In the States, they started off with one name. We've got 12 names already, just from what the members of the public have been sending in.
How did the bank respond when you tried to raise awareness of this?
Well, I wrote to the non-exec directors of the bank, and 7 days afterwards, they restarted a case against my wife, Helen, which had been paused for 6 years. So 7 days after the letter, they restarted a case, and then they offered to walk away from the case completely if Helen signed a non-disclosure agreement gagging her from talking about the alleged forged signatures.
And what do you think about all that?
Well, it's outrageous, isn't it? When people raise allegations about the conduct of the bank, particularly, an allegation which has already been shown in the States and resulted in a $25 billion fine. And their response to that was try and silence the customer who's raised the issue.
Now, as Lloyds pursues Julian's wife Helen through the court, the bank's putting pressure on by raising its estimate of the legal cost tenfold and warning Julian's wife will have to pay. That could ruin them, but they won't give up.
People in life sometimes have situations that are bigger than they are, and they're confronted with these and they have a choice of just walking away from it or walking towards it to try and fix it. And we sat and had a very deep conversation about what to do. Oh, sorry. And we realised we just had to do the right thing. So that's why we did it.
MPs are now listening. After the all-party group on fair business banking backed Julian's campaign, more members of the public sent dodgy signatures in. They included a remarkable find, a signature just like the one used to evict John and Brenda in 2013, but signed as recently as last year in someone else's name. Julian showed it to our handwriting expert.
So Adam, these two signatures, this one here in the top right-hand corner,
were both signed in different people's names, one in the name of someone called G and one in the name of someone called D. And what's your view of the signatures?
Well, I think it's very interesting that this is G and this is D, and yet it looks very much as if they're the same signature. And the reason for that is the beginning and the end, which are critical when you're examining signatures, are very similar. And it's interesting that the fluency is very similar. So I would say there's a high chance that these two were written by the same person.
MPs now want the allegations of forgery properly investigated by the Treasury Select Committee.
Well, I'm quite shocked by the brazen creation of signatures which are not the correct signatures, which are effectively seen to be forged signatures. So it's very clear that firm action is needed. We need to know how widespread this problem is, if it's like America or if it's just small pockets here and there. We need to know if anyone has lost out from this, and I think this is an important area that the Treasury Select Committee should investigate to make sure that consumers have not been losing out and to make sure that consumers are properly protected.
If banks and their representatives could be compelled to produce a much larger sample of signatures so they could be compared, allegations of forgery could be proved right or wrong, scientifically. For years, though, the banks have consistently refused to supply that signature comparison information.
I just think it's their attitude, the way they deal with people. These are human beings, and there's sort of no justice, there's no compassion.
John and Brenda fear many people have suffered the same fate as them. They just don't know it yet. Their hope is that MPs will be able to force banks to hand over the signature comparison information to show whether or not they, and possibly many others, were illegally thrown out of their homes. Well, we asked the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn, to be interviewed about UCAR, for which he is officially accountable. He declined. UCAR, which rejects the allegations, said treating customers fairly is a priority. It said it repeatedly asked the BBC to show evidence of the practice, but the BBC had refused to do so. On that, we didn't share names of the signatories due to concerns over privacy. A spokesman for Lloyds said, "We strongly refute the allegations made by Mr Watts on behalf of his wife. They've been investigated by the bank and found not to be true." The law firm which produced the documents in the Watts case says the person who signed was at work on the relevant date and the signatures were genuine. They say their non-disclosure agreements don't stop customers raising concerns with police or regulators and urge customers with evidence of wrongdoing to put it before them and the competent authorities without delay. We did write asking for a response to the wider allegations, other signatures, but they said they didn't have enough detail to respond. And the bank added that we are fully committed to doing everything reasonably possible to support mortgage customers in financial difficulty.
Andy, thank you very much. Well, we can now talk to Julian Watts, who we saw in Andy's film there, and also the Conservative MP Kevin Hollinrake. He's co-chair of a cross-party parliamentary group on fair business banking. Welcome, both of you. Julian, we saw you in our report. What alerted you to this in the first place? I know that you've got a background in process management. Did it make you hyper-vigilant to something like this?
It did. I mean, what happened was the investigation by the Attorney Generals in the United States highlighted this issue first, and the banks got fined $25 billion, and 4 million court cases by banks against customers were reviewed. And when I found out about that, I went back through court documents in cases that we've been involved in and found that some of the signatures appeared to have been forged.
And you were the first person to start looking into this in this country, and obviously you've come across cases since.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I was the first person along with my wife. And then we started connecting with other people. And as people started to go through their own files and look through the documents, we just started gathering more and more evidence. And it got to the point where we actually set up a campaign inviting the public to send in photos of the bank signatures on any documents they'd received from the banks.
And so where you are now is obviously you've been fighting on this for some time.
Yeah.
You want obviously the fight to continue and for MPs to look into it?
Yes, I mean, this is, in the United States, it was described as the largest consumer fraud in American history. So if the same thing has been happening in the UK, it's clearly appropriate for MPs and the Treasury Select Committee to investigate it.
So let's bring in Kevin Hollinrake. Good morning, thanks for joining us. What is your reaction to what is being claimed here?
Well, I'd like to thank Julian for his hard work and his bravery. We've been working with Julian since February on this, and this evidence is very concerning. This is about breaking the law. The law should apply equally to everybody. Nobody should be above the law. We'd like to see this evidence properly investigated. Why should it be left to Julian to do this work? The regulator should be looking for this evidence, should be going through the files. Lloyds should provide the evidence and the other banks involved, so we can establish how widespread this problem is.
And there are calls, obviously, for the Treasury Select Committee to investigate. That's a matter for the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, but we've heard that one member of the committee thinks it should happen. Presumably you think so too?
Yes, I do. I mean, that's, as you say, up to the Treasury Select Committee. I don't mind who investigates, to be honest. The person best placed to investigate this is the regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority. You know, I think what we've experienced in our work is a kind of financial feudalism that happens in the sector, that these bankers, whether it be PPI or the swap scandal or the great financial crisis or the willful mistreatment of thousands of small businesses, yet nobody's held to account. We want the people responsible for this, if the evidence shows that these allegations are correct, and all the other things I mentioned, we want those people held to account.
And Julian, Kevin's saying there that the regulator should be looking at it. Why isn't the regulator? Have you had any conversations? Have you tried to trigger an investigation?
Well, I think the main focus is trying to get the Treasury Select Committee to look into it. I mean, this is a huge potential national scandal. The Treasury Select Committee representing Parliament, and the evidence can be provided to them, both from the customers themselves, so all the evidence that's been sent in to us, but also because they can go to the banks and summon the bank chief execs to appear before the Treasury Select Committee and talk about what's been going on and provide evidence to the Select Committee.
Thank you very much, both of you, Julian Watts and Kevin Hollinrake. Thank you.